Hi everyone, it's Friday. Welcome to Devotions. May the Lord be with you. My dad always used to call Friday Poets' Day. Push off early. Tomorrow's Saturday. Well, today I'd like us to think about faith. When Jesus rose from the dead, Thomas at first was not in the group that saw him. And so he wanted to be sure that Jesus had raised. And he said, unless I see him and I put my hands in his wounds, I will not believe. Well, the time came, Jesus appeared, and before Thomas could even put his hands in the wounds, he was kneeling and said, my Lord and my God. And Jesus said to him, Thomas, you believe because you have seen, but blessed are those who do not see, and yet they believe. God is alive and he is active. He's busy. He's dynamic. He never misses a move, and he's at work in your life. And he always gets moving when we put our faith in him. The letter to the Hebrews in chapter 1 says, now faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. When Paul wrote to the Corinthians in his second letter in chapter 5, verse 7, he said, we live by faith and not by sight. I'm sure many of you have heard of George Muller. He was a young German man who went across to England, became a preacher, became an evangelist, but he felt God was calling him to build orphanages for those children who were in need. And that's exactly what he did, but he never asked for a single penny. He just trusted God, and the money came. And he built a whole row of orphanages. There's the famous story about him when there was no food in one of the orphanages. And so he got the children into breakfast one morning, and they were standing at the empty tables. And he said, we're going to now thank God for the food he's going to give us. And that's what he did. And then there was a knock at the door. It was the milkman. He said, look, my cart has just broken down. The axle's broken. I've got a whole load of milk. Why don't you take it? And then the baker arrived after that and said, I was baking my bread this morning and I felt God prompting me to bring you this load of bread. And so the bread came. And so they sat down and they had their breakfast. A wonderful story of faith. God has responded to my feeble faith at times. And, when I was a young guy, I was working in Port Elizabeth for a Christian organization called Scripture Union. And I was a single guy, and there was a very kind lady who lived in Port Elizabeth, and she was renting rooms to Christian workers, and I rented one of those rooms. And I had agreed to work there for 2 years and to stay in that rented room. Well, during the course of these 2 years, after the first year, at the beginning of the second year, my sister died. She was killed in a motor car accident. We had the funeral up in Joburg, and I came back to Port Elizabeth. But my heart was heavy. I wanted to be with my parents, and I really didn't know what the right decision was, to stay in PE or to go down to Cape Town. And I asked God, and I said, please, won't you guide me? I need to know what the right thing is. And I didn't know how God was going to guide me. But one morning when I was reading the Bible, I decided, Lord, I'm just going to open the Bible now. And I'm going to trust you to speak to me. I don't recommend this way for every occasion, but on this occasion, that's what I did. And it was the second last verse of the book of Acts that I'd never read before in my entire life. And this is what it said about Paul, who was in house arrest in a rented house in Rome. And it says, for 2 whole years, Paul stayed there in his own rented house and welcomed all those. And this is extraordinary. God is speaking to me. I must stay for 2 years in my own rented place. And God convicted me. That's the answer to your prayer. And I'm so pleased I did, because all sorts of good things happened out of staying in Port Elizabeth. So God gives us this wonderful gift of faith. And time and again, Jesus would say to those that he healed, your faith has made you whole. Your faith has made you whole. So what are the principles of this faith? And I'd like to mention a few of them. The one is that we need to know what we want. Because when the blind man came to Jesus, Jesus said to him, what do you want me to do for you? What do you want God to do for you? So the first thing is to know and to tell Jesus what it is that you need or that you want. The second thing is to accept the promise of God. He promises that he will give when we receive. He may not always give it exactly the way we want to, but we have verses like, ask and you will receive, seek, you will find, knock and the door will be opened. And there's just so many verses about God responding to prayer. That's the second thing. The third thing is that we need to give up and surrender. Lord, I just give up here. I don't want my way, I want your way. I want you to take over the situation. I surrender my way to your way. That giving up and emptying the cup of our lives in order that Jesus can fill us with what he will do for us. And then fourthly, is we need to thank God and to say, thank God, thank you, Lord, that you are responding to my prayer, that you will show me the way, that you will help me in this situation, that you will help me to know what is right and what is wrong here. I just receive it and I believe you're at work now, to accept that God is working. Faith is such a wonderful thing to live by. We don't always see what's coming, but God does. May God go with you, God bless you, and enjoy the weekend.